A travel advisory you can't ignore. Top 10 countries to avoid in 2025. Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Now, if you're anything like me, your New Year's resolutions probably involve finally taking that dream vacation. But before you dust off your passport and start packing your bags, we need to have a little chat about some places you might want to cross off your list. Because today, we're talking about the 10 countries you absolutely should not visit in 2025. These countries are facing some seriously heavy stuff. Conflicts, political instability, humanitarian crises. The kind of situations where tourist trap takes on a whole new meaning. So buckle up, grab your atlas and maybe a stiff drink, you're going to need it, as we break down the 10 countries that are, to put it mildly, are having a worse year than you are. And for the love of all that is holy, please stay away. Let's kick things off with a country that's sadly no stranger to this list, Afghanistan. It's not just dangerous, it's actively hostile to the very idea of tourism. Decades of conflict, a struggling government and a dire humanitarian crisis. Add various groups whose idea of fun isn't exactly tourist-friendly. Even booking a flight is like playing a tense game of roulette. So, unless you enjoy dodging landmines, maybe give Afghanistan a miss this year. Next up, we're heading over to Myanmar, also known as Burma, a country that's gone from must-see to must-avoid, faster than you can say military coup. You see, back in the good old days, read before 2021, Myanmar was a backpacker's paradise. Stunning temples, beautiful beaches, the works. But then the military decided to stage a hostile takeover, and suddenly that serene landscape became about as peaceful as a mosh pit at a heavy metal concert. We're talking mass protests, violent crackdowns, and a whole lot of people being forced to flee their homes. So yeah, maybe skip the whole finding yourself in the Himalayas trip this year, because the only thing you're likely to find in Myanmar right now is trouble. Alright, let's talk about Syria. Syria, really? Hasn't that been on the do not visit list for like a decade? And the answer is yes. Some things never seem to change. Syria has been ravaged by civil war for years. Cities reduced to rubble, millions displaced, and a generation scarred. Even where guns are silent, the situation is dire. The economy is in shambles, basic services non-existent. Syria has incredible history and culture, but visiting now is like a picnic in a minefield, so maybe give Syria a miss this year. Moving on to a country that's practically synonymous with hardship, South Sudan. This young nation has been plagued by problems since its birth, and 2025 is shaping up to be no different. We're talking a toxic cocktail of conflict, political instability, and a humanitarian crisis that's about as welcome as a skunk at a garden party. Imagine a place where armed groups roam freely, the government's about as effective as a chocolate fireguard, and basic necessities like food and water are harder to come by than a decent rom-com. And as if all that wasn't bad enough, Mother Nature decided to pile on, hitting the country with devastating floods that have displaced thousands and made an already dire situation even worse. So, unless your idea of a dream vacation involves dodging bullets, wading through floodwaters, and contracting exotic diseases, I'd say South Sudan is a solid no for 2025. From one Sudan to another, we now arrive at Sudan, a country that's sadly following in its southern neighbors' footsteps when it comes to, well, being an absolute mess. Sudan's been grappling with a brutal civil war that's turned the country into a no-go zone for anyone with a lick of common sense. We're talking widespread violence, human rights abuses, and a humanitarian crisis that's about as heartbreaking as a clown at a funeral. The country's infrastructure is in tatters, essential services are practically non-existent, and the economy is about as lively as a graveyard at midnight. So, unless you're a war journalist with a death wish, maybe skip the whole exploring ancient pyramids thing this year. Your life is worth more than a selfie in front of a historical landmark. Let's talk about Yemen, a country that's been ravaged by conflict for so long that it's practically become synonymous with war and suffering. We're talking years of fighting, a humanitarian crisis that's about as dire as a stand-up comedian's act at an open mic night, and a level of destruction that's hard to fathom. Imagine a place where airstrikes are a regular occurrence, children are starving to death, and the only thing flowing more freely than clean water is, well, let's just say it rhymes with bloodshed. And even if you somehow managed to avoid the bombs and the bullets, you'd still have to contend with a collapsed infrastructure, a lack of basic services, and the very real possibility of being kidnapped or taken hostage. Look, I'm all for supporting the tourism industry, but there's a time and a place for everything. And Yemen, my friends, is neither the time nor the place. So, unless you're a war correspondent with a death wish and a heart of stone, maybe give Yemen a miss this year. Next up, we're heading to the heart of Africa, to a country that's been plagued by violence and instability for decades, the Democratic Republic of the Congo. While the Congo is home to some of the world's most incredible wildlife, it's also home to some of its most brutal conflicts. We're talking armed groups, running rampant human rights abuses that would make your stomach churn, and a level of poverty that's hard to comprehend. And if that wasn't bad enough, the country's also grappling with disease outbreaks, a crumbling infrastructure, and an economy that's about as stable as a Jenga tower built by a toddler on a roller coaster. So yeah, maybe skip the whole trekking through the jungle thing this year, because the only thing you're likely to find in the Congo is trouble. Let's talk about Burkina Faso, a country that was once considered a beacon of peace and stability in West Africa. But unfortunately, those days are long gone, replaced by a grim reality of terrorism, violence, and displacement. In recent years, Burkina Faso has seen a surge in attacks by extremist groups, who have turned their sights on civilians and security forces alike. We're talking bombings, kidnappings, and a level of brutality that's designed to instill fear and chaos. And as the violence has escalated, so too has the humanitarian crisis. Millions of people have been forced to flee their homes, seeking refuge in overcrowded camps where disease and hunger are constant threats. So, unless you're a humanitarian worker with a heart of gold and a Kevlar vest, maybe skip the whole exploring the Sahel thing this year. Next up, we're heading to the Caribbean, to a country that's been plagued by poverty, natural disasters, and political instability for far too long, Haiti. And while Haiti has always faced its share of challenges, the situation has taken a turn for the worse in recent years, with gang violence spiraling out of control. Imagine a place where armed gangs control entire neighborhoods, where kidnappings are a daily occurrence and where even the police are afraid to go. That's the reality for many Haitians today, living in a state of constant fear and uncertainty. And as if the violence wasn't bad enough, Haiti is also grappling with a severe food crisis, a cholera outbreak, and a political vacuum that's only exacerbated the country's problems. So, unless you're a humanitarian worker with a death wish and a surplus of medical supplies, maybe skip the whole island getaway thing this year. And finally, we come to Mali, a country that was once home to a thriving empire and a center of trade and culture, but those days are long gone, replaced by a grim reality of conflict, instability, and a humanitarian crisis that's spiraling out of control. For years, Mali has been battling a complex insurgency that's torn the country apart. We're talking armed groups vying for control, ethnic violence, and a level of lawlessness that's made travel outside of the capital city a risky proposition, to say the least. And as if the security situation wasn't bad enough, Mali is also facing a severe drought, food shortages, and a political crisis that's only exacerbated the country's problems. So, unless you're a seasoned war correspondent with a death wish and a fluency in French and Bambara, maybe give Mali a miss this year. And there you have it, folks, the 10 countries you absolutely should not visit in 2025. Now, I know this wasn't exactly the most uplifting way to kick off your new year, but hey, someone had to be the bearer of bad news. And trust me, when it comes to your safety, I'd rather be the annoying friend who tells you to put on sunscreen than the one who's awkwardly silent at your funeral. But in all seriousness, it's important to stay informed about what's happening in the world, even if it's not always pretty, because knowledge is power. And the more you know, the better equipped you'll be to make smart, safe decisions about your travels. So, before you book that next trip, do your research, check travel advisories, and maybe give these 10 countries a wide berth. Thanks for watching. Stay safe out there.